Hmm?
Hello, Matt.
I don't hear you, Jennifer.
You don't hear me?
You must have your microphone.
Well, I'm unmuted.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
I still don't hear you. It says that your microphone's off right now, Jennifer.
Am I on now?
No, I still don't hear you. Is your earphones connected?
Yeah. Well, let me. Okay. Sure enough, right off the bat, I'm showing that
I still don't hear you.
Okay, hang on. Oh, Catherine says. Catherine says
she. Other people can hear both of us, but
Okay, Matt can't.
I got it. My thing was on mute because.
There we go. All right. Are you good?
Yeah.
Yay. Okay. Hi, everyone. I hope everyone out there can hear us. You're both, okay, I think we're good. So welcome, everyone. Welcome to The Artist Eye. Welcome to Matt Clark, our featured artist. Let me get this going. Of course, it doesn't want to go. Matt, is that the next slide? Yep. The artist with how to participate? Good. Yep. Okay. Yeah. After a year of Zoom, I still can't master the technology, but we're going to try to get through this together today. Just a note to our audience out there, please use the Zoom Q&A to ask questions throughout the program. You know that your microphones are muted. And at the end of the program, I will moderate the Q&A with Matt. It's just such a pleasure to welcome Matt today. You know, for those of you who may or may not know, we were scheduled to do this program a year ago, live in the galleries. And we had actually even started working on it. And then, of course, we all went home. So I'm just glad that we were able to get back to it a year later, albeit in a different format. But here we are. So that's me on the right. I'm Jennifer Kessler Price, curator for Asian, African, and Ancient American art here at the Kimball, in my pink dress, looking very curatorial. And there's Matt on the left, looking much more relaxed in Santa Fe, holding up some fabulous tumbleweed. Love that photo. So Matt is from Fort Worth, grew up here, and growing up, and also that his mother, Mary Frances, worked at the Kimball. She was in the education department when I first came here in '93, and I remember her very well. She's still with us, or not at the Kimball, but she's still with us. And so growing up going to the Kimball gave artist and professor Matt Clark an early appreciation for art in all of its forms. He would wander the galleries with his mother time and again, and the architecture and light resonated within his forming mind and set the path for his creative career. After pursuing his master's degree in painting at the prestigious Cranbrook Academy of Art in Michigan, Matt lived in Los Angeles and London before returning to North Texas. He is currently an assistant professor of practice and faculty director at the Center for Entrepreneurship and Economic Innovation at the University of Texas at Arlington. Matt's work embraces the abstract feel of place, repositioning the traditional complacent landscape within one of viewer-based interpretation. And so with that, Matt, I will let you take it over.
Right. Thanks, Jennifer. It's a real honor and privilege to be here and come back as an artist and not as an audience member, but in a different format. This museum really planted the seeds for my creative development as an artist and a painter. So it's a real privilege to be back here today. I thought I would start with just an absurd photo, because we are in such absurd times today. And my friend William Grenier and myself were in Santa Fe. This is actually outside of Espanola. And we were scouting places to shoot photography and came across this stack of tumbleweeds that were all our size, and it was just too absurd. So there I am. I'll have to tell you, Jennifer, though, when you asked me to do the artist eye, I have to admit that I was a little stressed out having to select just one piece from an outstanding collection. So I didn't know what I was going to do, but I was a little thankful when this transitioned to virtual, because then I knew that I could pepper the talk with a lot of works that have resonated with me over the years, and then some maybe new ones that resonate with me today. So it's such a pleasure to be here. Thanks again, Jennifer.
Great. Well, it's a pleasure for me too. And with that, we'll click ahead, and here are some of your favorites from the collection.
And you know, how can you not choose these three magnificent paintings? I mean, I remember just sitting and, you know, being in awe of Caravaggio's, you know, it was all about the mastery of the medium to me, you know, all three of these in different ways. I remember George de la Tour and the exhibition that he had. And for me, you know, he was that painter of light. It wasn't Thomas Kinkade. This was the guy that it was a master at creating these things of light, like the glass the woman's holding who's standing. I mean, just amazing. And then as I developed as an artist, you know, looking at Paul Cézanne and looking at the individuality starting to emerge in that period of time. I'll have to say, I started off my academic career as an art historian. So it's really a great fun for me to be here today talking about this stuff. Undergrad BA in art history from Arizona State. So it was amazing for me and kind of a revelation to see all of the marks and the individuality that Cézanne employed. And I remember staring in front of that painting and seeing all the subtleties, the slight shifts in perspective. These are three paintings that I come back to about every time I visit the museum. And like the Caravaggio reminds me when I did a year abroad and lived in Florence and would visit Rome, and those amazing paintings in Rome, the conversion and the crucifixion of St. Peter, just blew my socks off. And although I'm not a realist painter, there was a lot of takeaways that I gathered from them. Like I said before, the mastery of the medium, the sense of space composition.
Right.
You know,
and then I know, so moving on to Boucher, I know that this is also a suite of paintings that inspire and inform your work.
And it almost seems like the Kimball was made for pieces like this, majestic, monumental, really pulling the viewer in and up to the painting, up into the heavens and this atmospheric space. And that's what really interested me in this painting. And you know, I'm interested in creating those kinds of atmospheric spaces or places. And I think that part of these paintings really resonated for me.
Right. And also, I think, I mean, for those of you out there, if you don't know these paintings, they're monumental. I mean, they're huge. And a lot of Matt's work is also not quite on this monumental scale, but on a large scale. I mean,
Someday.
7 feet, 8 feet. So yeah, I love these works too. And that, you know, also just your art is, you know, based in landscape, but abstracted. So I can see what you would take from this and translate into, you know, what you will eventually do.
And just being in the space of the Kimball, you know, I think one of the best museums I've ever seen in the world. And
I agree.
there's something about it, just being in that place that feels church-like in a way, but full of light and energy.
Mhm.
And it's a real hat off to Khan for just creating such a wonderful space. And
Agreed.
I think that, those kinds of spaces would also have a play in the development of my creative practice.
So, yeah, so let's look at kind of going, I guess, sort of to the beginning, because we've got two works here. Um, the Untitled 60/30 on the left, this is a work that you did just post grad school.
Mhm.
Um, and then the work on the right is a work that you did in LA, also just kind of after grad school. Just to mention that when you were at Cranbrook, that you sold a large number of paintings to the Chrysler Corporation. Yay. And that gave you funding to go to LA and, paint and try to get into the art community there and really sort of get your career off the ground.
Yeah, the great thing about Cranbrook was its connection to some of the big auto um, companies in Michigan, and they're big supporters. And without that, who knows, I might have been back in Texas. So that really allowed me to um, continue kind of my journey in
Mhm.
living and being in different places. I remember at this time that I was searching for meaning in my artwork, and that was a really challenging thing for me to do. But there was one thing that always was consistent, and maybe the genesis for me of being a painter, and that's the material. First and foremost, I was just seduced by the possibilities of what one could do with paint. And I
Mhm.
always see, my studio more as a scientist lab, where I'm exploring and investigating and discovering new ways of creating and constructing a painting. And like I said, I was unsure of the meanings of the work. I was heavy in the process. I was taking on Gerhard Richter, my big hero. I tell you, all the critiques in grad school kind of centered around that. And that was a kind of a burden on my back. And I was trying to move past them.
Mhm.
You see the painting on the left where this real physical topography of paint on canvas is built up. Uh,
Right.
Whereas the space is compressed and the colors mixed onto the surface in the painting on the right. One being more atmospheric, one maybe being more close to uh, a reflection or water or something like that.
Right.
As you see, it was untitled. And so I didn't know that uh, in LA, I would really discover what the meaning of my work was. And that was a sense of place. Moving to LA was a great experience, but it's a chaotic place.
Right.
Everybody is doing their own hustle, their own jam to be the next, famous person.
Right.
So that sense of simultaneity is what kind of emerged into the work. And it wasn't really until after I finished this series of 5-foot paintings that I realized, hey, my work is about this idea and sense or memory of place or space. And the idea that space not only exists in the physical dimension, but also in the spiritual and the psychological. So that really opened the discussion, I guess, for me, and propelled the work forward.
Right. So, yeah, that idea of physical space and memory, and you
Mhm.
know uh, every time you move or go to a different place, geographically, and maybe it's a different mood that's reflected in your work. And so this
Right.
next piece, this is from LA. You went to London, which was for you a dark period, literally. You didn't have any money, and maybe you were a little depressed.
Certainly,
London
certainly.
is kind of dark and gloomy.
I had seasonal affective disorder after being in London for 2 years. The gray,
Right.
I've been like in the sun for my whole life. And so the atmosphere really affected me. Before we jump to this kind of period in my life, I wanted to say that when I was in LA, I was fortunate enough to work at Gemini GEL first, which was this great print house that worked with Richard Serra, Bryce Martin, Via Selmans, just to name a few. And that really got my foot in the door in the art community. And then I moved on to work at the Getty. And what a beautiful place to work as an artist, to be inspired. They had a Richter show with Richter juxtaposed with Caspar David Friedrich.
Mm-hmm.
I went to that show every day before the museum opened, just sitting there with those pieces. That was my church, and a great experience. Now hopping, 3, 4, 5 years later to this piece titled Every Win, which when I came back from London, thankfully Dan Blagg and Art Space 111 let me get my old studio back, and I holed up upstairs and created these enamel paintings, which was a new paint for me. Really viscous, high intense color, sexy surface. It was a lot of fun to work with. There was almost this performative aspect when you're pulling paint across the surface. All the action, the mixing occurs on that picture plane. And literally you have one shot to get this done, because the curing time is pretty quick. It'll start to sit in 30, 45 minutes. Ironically, the paint's called One Shot as well. So this was kind of a big transition for me. Still, you see these compressed spaces, maybe starting to move past Gerhard Richter a little bit, maybe seeing past maybe that darkness that I'm experiencing emotionally.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember this show in Colorado I called it the playlist show, because they were all songs that I would repeat, all these kind of melancholic songs. This is Massive Attack. I don't know if they were this healing or cathartic thing for me. I always say that, making art is a therapeutic exercise.
Absolutely.
And
Well, yeah.
this just helped me move on to another place. I wish I could still utilize enamel paint, but it is just so toxic and bad for you. I moved to acrylic.
So you came out of the darkness into the
Mhm.
light, thankfully.
Literally, right? This makes me think of stained glass, and I've always been amazed when I was young, looking at the stained glass in church and just being amazed at that and the light that it brings. This was another kind of new path for me. I always was looking at structure and artists like Mondrian or Agnes Martin or even Bryce Martin, about how they structure their painting or how they have this set of rules. So I started employing some of those parameters. And one of them was to start imprinting, right? A wet canvas onto a dry canvas, and kind of leave this residual kind of patina of sorts that starts to depict the image and starts to depict the direction the painting will take. You see the white kind of blackish areas. Those were these marks made from another wet canvas the same size.
Yeah, maybe explain a little bit, because I didn't understand it at first. So the kind of not black, but well, the grayish and black kind of speckled areas, those are the ones that are imprinted on the canvas.
Mhm.
And then that kind of led you to the structure that's painted
Mark that you
over
could
it.
kind of, right, the marks that you could kind of trace started to build this painting for me. And you can imagine, like Mondrian starting to construct and move through this painting. Lots of kinds of decisions along the way. And
Mhm.
I always say abstract painting for me is like puzzle solving, right? We're trying to arrive at something, but it's hard to put a finger on it. So it's puzzle solving without the box to go by.
Right.
And, this is almost a puzzle of sorts. And I remember when I was creating, I was thinking about it. Title of this piece is Ahau, which is this wonderful, magical place in Tulum that just kind of holds a special place in my heart. I love Mexico. I love the beach. And that was just kind of the reference to that specific place.
Right. Yeah. I mean, maybe just to mention here, your memory-based work. I mean, you're thinking about a particular place or a landscape, but it's really the memory of it, and that's generating then what you create. Um, so this kind of takes us to another, I think, development in your work, but still coming from that idea of layering and mark making. And now that's kind of being combined again with the idea of referencing a landscape, transmitting the essence of a place. And I know you love this Monet Weeping Willow because he's also definitely referencing a landscape. This is from Giverny, and this is a tree that he painted over and over again. And this is actually from late in his life, one of his last paintings, and kind of something of a self-portrait, you could say. But I definitely can see, the parallels here.
Sure, sure. And this was another kind of departure as far as ways of constructing a painting. And I remember vividly the Monet and Mediterranean show at the Kimball, I don't know, 20 years ago, and what an impact that had, because the way that he depicted water was phenomenal. Another master paint handler. And that's what really pulled me into Monet, because you felt emotion and feeling. And I wanted to kind of pull that in somehow. Now, my ways of getting there were different. And I'm always trying to balance these two kinds of opposites, the idea of order and chaos, the intentional and the accidental, and really trying to find a way to balance those two through the creative process. And you can see that really the direct reference to, in my mind, landscape and Monet here on the left. All of these tiny little marks and dots dispersed across and layered create this really amazing field that in my mind can take you to different kinds of places.
Right.
That's what I hope, is that, the viewer is able to find some kind of point of reference and relationship with the painting
I
that
mean,
they can associate.
exactly. The viewer interprets it based on maybe their own experiences and memories. I mean, I definitely see light on the water. I see forest canopy. I mean, I can see a lot of different things here. How large is this painting?
This one's about 7 feet squared.
Yeah.
And there's this really density of that built up mark. And I've always been interested in, the layered paintings, even back to the painting in 2002, where I was, investigating that topography of paint. It's still there. It's just the space, the physical space is now being compressed.
Right.
So there's still all that action and movement on the canvas.
Well, and yeah, you say topography. I mean, yes, that's exactly what this is. It's a topography of paint layers. So moving forward from this, then now we are interjecting something new into what you had been doing previously with this. But now you're kind of dividing up the space, the picture plane, with bands and with something of a horizon line, you could say. So on the lower half, obviously, you still have this layering of paint, abstract reference to landscape, and then on the top is something different. And maybe you could explain just again, like the medium that you're using in this case.
Well, the bottom is acrylic. The top is, I was still kind of playing a little bit with the enamel. And Calamia is a place on the Pacific coast in Panama. And the water was a tinted green. And I've never seen a water like that. It was just beautiful. And oftentimes when I look back at my work and have some distance or time from it, I realize, some of the things that I did were directly a result of things happening in my personal life.
Right.
And so this band or this division came into play at this time when I was having some big changes in my life. And to me, that kind of division, that hard edge started to represent that for me. And
Interesting.
it's gone on to represent something else, but that was this clear indication of this kinds of separation.
I mean,
And I
yeah.
started exploring those kinds of ideas a little more. And to me, then the edges became really important. And the landscape really re-entered the conversation I'm having with painting. Not that I even expected it. I always let my paintings organically kind of grow, or myself as an artist organically evolve. And so it was really a kind of defining or maybe eye-opening for me how maybe autobiographical or self-portraits, you see all of these paintings really being.
Right.
And, I still like the fact of building this density and then being able to unpack or really dissect the making of the painting, because everything is evident in there. And I always, love getting up close and really investigating the painting and trying to put myself in the artist's shoes. How did they do that? What was their technique? And
well, what I like, and we talked about this a little bit when we were reviewing things. So what I see in the top band, from my point of reference, I see a northern sung mountain landscape. I mean, which I just think is really interesting because, again, we talked about people seeing what they want to see. And I definitely see a landscape. And to me, it's, I think of the, monochrome ink landscapes with the craggy peaks and the mist and the clouds. And so I just find that
and I have to think
interesting.
some of that filtered in because I love those kinds of paintings and the ease with which they seemed that they were made, and that fluidity in that top layer.
Right.
Reminds me of that too.
Interesting. So again, now that you've introduced the band, now you're kind of moving forward with exploring that a little bit more, but still obviously thinking about the paint on the surface of the canvas and what is that doing, and the physicality of it.
And this was really kind of a new breath, a new life for me. I returned back to the bright, cheerful paintings that we first saw from 2002 and later. I never expected to make paintings like this. They happen. And I can't help but think of some other early influences being Rothko, who was a hero. I always kind of think I filter through different artists as I develop, and Sean Scully. Sean Scully in particular, because my mom, hi mom, I know she's out there watching. Mom I think she took me out of school to watch Sean Scully speak at the Old Modern about the Catherine paintings.
Wow. Yeah.
I was fortunate enough 2 years ago to meet him at his show at the National Gallery for a little cocktail reception that my wife set up for me for my 48th birthday.
Nice.
So it was a cool thing because I said, hey man, you kind of started me on my journey. Anyhow, these bands, like I said, I didn't expect to make them. There was this new breath. I was thinking about the ideas, the handmade, the thoughts about textiles and crafts started entering my headspace. I love the idea of the imperfect, like wabi sabi. I like seeing
Happy accidents.
Right. like Mr. Ross.
Yeah.
So this kind of opened things up for me.
Right.
Obviously, you know, maybe you could think about Pat Steer as a contemporary too.
Mm-hmm. And so from here, now another thing that is going to become really part of your work off and on is collaboration. And this is one of your first collaborations. I mean, it's the second in the series, but this is actually with a graduate student of yours, Jackson Eccles. So
Right.
it's
So I met Jackson Eccles probably in 2016 or so when he was a grad student. And I was just amazed by the work he was creating. He was taking photosensitive paper and submerging it in different situations, in a river, in a McDonald's dumpster, buried with sand, sawdust, mud. And the results were these beautiful abstractions that, you know, had an allure to me. They had this kind of space, this atmospheric space. And I thought, well, what would happen when we marry these two different styles, different approaches, but still two artists kind of rooted in the process? And so we
mhm,
started working organically together. And we were so surprised and elated to see what happened. Now, collaborations are kind of difficult because there's two kind of strong identities and minds working together.
right.
So there has to be that kind of open line of communication and a back and forth. And I think we really found some synergy here because in my mind, this is something that I haven't seen, where at one point it looks like a photograph of a painting, on another looks like a painting of a photograph. So I like that kind of push pull in between the two. And you know, this kind of started my whole interest in my, you know, a majority of my creative practice now involves collaboration.
Right.
And it really started off with those questions. What would happen if? What if? And so that started to send me on these other directions. And, you know, I'm so grateful that this kind of opened my practice to something new, another kind of discovery, another kind of way of experimenting, another way of challenging and pushing, you know, my creative voice. And so telos, you know, is a Greek, I guess, word referencing the full potential of a person or thing.
Uh-huh. And then just, I know I asked this question. So Jackson's photograph is the kind of blue background underneath, and your painting is the yellow, the
Mhm.
ochre laid
And
over it.
and just so everyone has a sense of scale, this is about 5 feet squared. So that's a, you know, in terms of a photograph, it's pretty big.
Right. So another kind of life change is coming up. And again, this idea of collaboration.
So
Um,
can I just say a little bit before you
of
start?
course. Yep.
So about shortly after I met Jackson, Oaxaca, Mexico came into my headspace. I don't know why. I was reading about it. I remember the New York Times. It was one of the, you know, #1 of 52 places to travel that year.
Hmm.
I had to go. I had to see what it was about because something was there for me. And I just wanted to show the flavor of what pulled me to Oaxaca. These two are, so you can go ahead and play. Now, there's this liveliness or livelihood that exists in Oaxaca that I haven't seen in other places. This celebration of life, but
It's
also it has this huge history and these traditions.
exactly. So yeah, I love that video because to me it's just pure joy.
And
And
mind you, these guys really like to have fun. It's about 11 o'clock in the morning. Most everybody has a shot glass necklace. They're passing around mezcal and champagne. At this hotel where they stayed at, they were still going on at 9 o'clock at night. So
Yeah.
I'm sure they weren't feeling too hot the next day. But
So,
just the texture and flavor is so beautiful that you can't help but love this place. And if people are watching and listening haven't been, I would move Oaxaca to the top of your list, because
Yeah.
it's a special place. Three valleys merging together with this history that I know you'll talk about. The farm on the right, that was another kind of inspiration for me.
yeah. So, and I've been to Oaxaca as well, and plan to go back as soon as I can. But yeah, I thought this was so great because really we started this conversation when we started the conversation a year ago,
Right.
about doing this presentation. We were looking at the Zapotec urn in relationship to work that you were creating in Oaxaca, which we'll look at in a minute. But to give some context, so the Zapotec culture was based in the Valley of Oaxaca. And you can see the date on this, 400 to 500 AD. So their ceremonial site, Monte Alban, where they worship their deities and the deceased, is a flattened mountaintop, and with these pyramidal structures. And they're known for these grayware effigy urns. This is actually an urn. It's hollow in the top. And it's in the form of Cosillo, which is one of their major deities of lightning and rain. All Mesoamerican cultures have a deity of rain, a rain deity. And this is really wonderful because you can see that his face is this very sculptural kind of mask. The headdress is evocative of fields of corn. And then his eyes are like sort of steppe clouds. So clouds, rain, crops. There's this kind of bifurcated tongue that's coming out from his mouth. And that is like a snake. And the flashing tongue of the snake is like the flash of lightning. Also, his nose is kind of a bit like a jaguar's snout, and the roar of the jaguar is like thunder. I just love all these illusions. And then he's dressed as a priest. He has this kind of feathered cape on, and then the kind of, it's not a belt, but draped across the front, you see this tasseled, these tassels at the bottom, which also kind of represent you can sort of interpret them as snakes even, with rain coming down on them. So again, the whole thing kind of echoes the idea of a rainstorm, a tropical mountain rainstorm. So go ahead.
I love these figurines, what I call them figurines, that you see in a lot of museums in Oaxaca. And in fact, I'm doing another collaboration of these kinds of mask-like figures inspired by all these Zapotec sculptures.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, this is
so
great.
we arrived, this is how we felt. We had arrived. Weezy might be unhappy with me for sharing this. This is my daughter, Weezy. By the way, they have the best hot chocolate too, so she was delighted to be there, and just the clean air, the food also is a big pull there. This is where mole comes from. We were in heaven, and we were fortunate enough to spend the summer of 2018 and summer of 2019 there creating. So the point of going to Oaxaca obviously was all of the culture and the richness in just being creative. But there was this craft tradition throughout Oaxaca. Every little pueblo spread throughout Oaxaca is known for a certain craft, like the alebrije on the left. This is from one of my collaborators, the Jacobo and Maria Angeles. And if you've been to Mexico, Cancun, Acapulco, you've probably seen an alebrije in the airport. And I had for years and never paid much attention to it. Till I went to San Martin Tilcate and went to Jacobo and Maria's taller. They call their studios a taller there.
Right.
And I was just blown away by the intricacy, the detail, and the community that they built around making these. So they had a school, they had a foundry, they have a ceramic shop. There were over 100 people working with Jacobo and Maria for them.
Right.
I knew as soon as I met this guy, so we got to go up in his studio and meet him. And I kind of pitched my idea then and there. And he was like, yeah. He's a very happy, gracious person. And we came back and really pitched him hard. His wife and his son were there. They were all excited because no one had ever wanted to do a project like this. So excited that we started painting that day that we pitched it to him.
Wow. So I just had to bring in our Mixtec style rain god vessel because we both immediately saw the connection, and obviously this alebrije tradition and the style come out of Mixtec style, which is also based in the Valley of Oaxaca. And this happens to be, this is a rain god vessel, but it also deals with deity impersonation, and it's a priest that's actually garbed, with a costume. So his face is like a mask, but you can see the jaws of the jaguar that are enveloping his face. And then he's got like a spear and a club. So he's also a warrior. But, every inch of the surface is painted in this dense, symbolic and geometric decoration. So I can totally see the connection.
Oh, sure.
And here's another video that we're going to play. And
Can I just
you
set it
want
up?
to? Yeah, please do.
So, like I said, we as soon as we agreed, we went running forward with this, and it was so exciting to the both of us because not only were two artists coming together to make something that they didn't expect or think they could make, but now we're bridging cultures. And especially at that time when there was a lot of tension between the United States and Mexico, this felt like we were, brothers in arms together. And it was a really great aspect of that collaboration, which goes on today. And so we thought, hey, let's make a video. So we found a filmmaker in Oaxaca, Arturo. And here's kind of what he created after following both of us around for a couple of weeks in Oaxaca. Hope you like it. Get ready for the music too. That's my outdoor studio, the house we're in Oaxaca.
love that video. So out of that came this collaboration, and that's what we have here, these two
And
amazing collaborative works.
like I said, collaboration is difficult in trying to find that harmony between two creative practices. And I'll tell you, this one took a while. They're, trained as craftsmen, so they're used to doing kind of the same thing over and over. And what I wanted to do was fuse both practices together, so synthesize them well together.
Mm-hmm.
At the beginning, they were just superimposing their animal figures over the top of the painting and not infusing it within. So when we came back and finally found that synergy, I think I almost cried. It was so like, because I had that vision and I knew that this would be an important collaboration. And it really was a great result of this relationship that we built. And,
Yeah, I just think these
now.
are, yeah. I mean, it really, the two things came together, beautifully. And I mean, if you didn't get it from the video, I mean, Matt's work is, the paint that's laid down on the canvas before Jacobo and Maria begin their this exquisite, kind of black ink painting
And
on top of it.
just so the viewers know, these are on paper, on watercolor paper. They're acrylic and watercolor and handmade paint made from probably indigo dyes here.
Right.
They also use cochineal. It's amazing to see them and how they use different kinds of things like honey to change the color of these pigments.
And I guess too, with your work and some of the work that we've looked at already, the idea of mark making.
Mm-hmm.
And they're obviously also interested in that idea of mark making.
And I've been, fascinated by it since, I discovered Aboriginal painting. And
Mm-hmm.
maybe that's another thing that kind of pulled me into Jacobo and Maria.
Mm-hmm.
But it was really, to me, a celebration of two cultures coming together.
So again, just kind of thinking about memory of place, how a landscape inspires you to paint something that's, an emotion for you,
Mm-hmm.
a memory for you.
And what landscape atmospheric painter can't love Turner? I mean, I had the opportunity, obviously, to see a Turner show at the Kimball and then a Turner show at the DMA. My mom also worked at the DMA, which was pretty cool. And then the National Gallery in London. So I had my full fare of experiences in front of Turners. And, when I looked at Puesta del Sol, which I created when we were staying in Puerto Escondido, which is on the coast of Oaxaca, I literally had a studio overlooking the ocean. And every day I would paint the water and the sky.
Mm-hmm.
And it was amazing the subtle changes that the atmosphere would have on the blues of the ocean and the sky. And then the sunsets, just so beyond real. And so I kind of wanted to capture that feeling or that sense.
Yeah. So now you're kind of combining a bunch of things. These are sewn pieces, and you can explain that a little bit better. But, this is, here we have the mark making, the layering, the bands,
Mm-hmm.
but now a new way of putting that all together.
And again, just like me making the bands, I never imagined that this would be a direction that my paintings took. I was laying big swaths of canvas on the wall behind me and painting these really large kind of atmospheric abstractions. And at one point, I decided to start ripping it, this kind of violent action, almost destroying the painting. but then rebuilding it and healing it or nourishing it back with being sewn back together. So I was using some of the influences of Oaxaca, particularly the weaving, the tapetes that woven in the foothills of the mountains of Sierra Madres, right outside of Oaxaca. And that had to have some kind of effect. Me thinking about Navajo rugs. I remember as a kid looking through books that showcased Navajo blankets and rugs, and I was really influenced by that. I remember my grandmom always saying, hey, you have a little Native American in you. Well, lo and behold, I did a 23andMe recently, and I'm just a boring Euromut. No flavor, no interest here, no Native American in me. I was really disappointed. But there was one good note. I did discover that I do have the same muscle composition as elite athletes. That was my one good takeaway from taking 23andMe. But
Wow.
Another kind of breakthrough in different ways of putting a painting together. And I can't help but think about the analogy of that violent kind of ripping apart and that sewing back together of life's curveballs, and how we build ourselves back up, and that's how character and values are built. So I kind of like the analogy of how these were made with how one develops as a human being.
And then, of course, life threw us all a big curveball.
Right.
So, and then Corona a year ago.
You make sure mine is plugged in. Okay. I'm low on battery, so I'm making sure my computer's plugged in. There we go. Okay, good. So I remember I was at Katy Trail Ice House when Judge Jenkins said, shelter in place starting tomorrow. And what a curveball that was. And a year later, we're still kind of in it. So to me, this was this opportunity to go get in the studio. And I didn't know what the heck to do besides respond. And so these dots started appearing that then came to symbolize the virus and the spread of the virus. Right. And it kind of continued and expanded to fill up my whole wall and take 30 days to do. So it's the first 30 days of the coronavirus of painting basically a day.
Yeah.
Just an exercise, I guess, to take my mind off of all of the things that were happening, all of the uncertainties, what kind of panic. Yeah. And so the studio became a great refuge for me. And my wife during that time sent me a statement by the artist Lee Ufan. And if you're interested in it, he was writing a statement about the coronavirus, which I think is on his gallery, Listen Gallery website. And it gist of it basically was this opportunity that he saw that humanity had to reacquaint with nature. And that really stuck to me. It's given me chills, goosebumps right now. And lo and behold, I was fortunate enough to reconnect with nature. Fortunate enough to get out of Texas for a bit and spend a little time in the mountains of New Mexico and paint outside and be influenced by the beauty of nature, and trying to depict, how I felt about it. I see these as kind of triumphant, jubilant studies, so to speak. And, another freeing thing for me and a way of thinking about the landscape and our environment in a different way.
Right. Yeah. So just to clarify for all of you out there. So, I mean, you were, went to Santa Fe for the summer of 2020, where, you were in this beautiful landscape that obviously inspired you to do these works.
And we were at the end of Cerro Gordo, which was this, street that ends at a hiking trail. So we were really kind of at the edge of the mountains and nature. Yeah. And then out of that, when I got back to the studio in August, this came from the studies. And to me, it really represented that synthesis of the landscape with textile and textile arts, right? Patterns. And
Mhm.
so I like that kind of idea between how there's this maybe tension or push-pull between, is that a landscape or is that just a pattern of something?
Right.
I like how that goes back and forth. And heck, these paintings still feel so fresh to me that there's some kind of vulnerability that I feel about them, about showing them. And,
Well,
I think about our environment again. I've had this kind of new look at our environment. And I think that, that vulnerability that maybe I feel, has got to be echoed in the vulnerability of our environment now.
right.
So just, I guess, being in Santa Fe and then making these paintings, gave me this different look. Or
Well, and to me, it's like this is the combination and culmination of everything that you've done up to this point, referencing the landscape, pattern making, um, bands, um, kind of the tactile quality of the paint, the drippy down here. I mean, it's all there and all layered, I think you said this is about 7 foot
7, 8 feet
square.
long.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. 7,
it-
maybe 8 foot long
right.
layers. And that kind of backdrop was just this density of paint.
Mm-hmm. And then going back to the idea of collaboration, because that's something that I think is, well, you're still interested in, obviously.
Mhm. We'll try to run through these last few so we
Yeah,
can Q&A. And
yeah.
William Grenier, great friend of mine. We were both in Santa Fe, and he actually took that picture of me holding the tumbleweed. I was out on one of our scouting trips. And I always like a great kind of visual challenge. And this was another one for me in this collaboration. How do I find a way to synthesize paint and photography together in a
Mm-hmm.
new and interesting way, maybe shifting the perspective a little bit? And these are really fun exercises in a way, and I'm really excited about the results and where they're taking this collaboration.
Yeah. So
But
yeah, Will took the photographs in Santa Fe, and then you back in the studio did the overlay of the painting.
and I'm not seeing anything like this either, so
Yeah, I
that's
love
the
these
thing about
too.
collaboration, is the unexpected outcomes.
And then just to kind of bring us a little bit to the end, and thinking about the environment, because again, and for you, there's generally always some kind of a landscape
Right.
reference or memory or emotion.
And this was made August, September 2020, right when all of the big California fires were happening.
Mhm.
It's titled Atlas, after I think the biggest one, maybe the largest fire ever. And I couldn't help but think of the people and the livelihoods that were destroyed, and that kind of smothering feeling of smoke and ash falling and just covering everything else up.
Yeah.
Kind of, and again, that idea of maybe vulnerability kind of entered to the work. And this again is probably 8 feet, 9 feet wide. Just another way of investigating how a painting is made,
Mhm.
and letting gravity in some cases make the painting for you. And again, it's that nice balance and dance between that idea of the intentional and the accidental.
Right.
Put a little Bob Ross in there.
So in our final slide, we kind of bring it back to Monet and his, wonderful Weeping Willow, and then your continued sort of exploration of and reference to the environment and kind of what we're doing to our planet
Right.
here.
the depletion of the natural resources, gold, oil, those kinds of things, and you know, the harms that humans are having on it. So maybe it's this, you know, awareness raised for me, and I guess now the hope is maybe I can be a catalyst to raise other people's awareness. In my class, I'm always like, who's bringing in a plastic water bottle? Buy a bottle and fill it up, for God's sake.
Exactly.
It doesn't take much. Plus, you're spending a ton of money.
So we wanted to give, I know you're in your studio, so we actually wanted to take
I am
everyone.
going to give you guys a quick tour. I hope I don't make anybody's get dizzy or anything, but I'm going to give you a quick kind of view of what's going on in the studio now. Here's some more images of the collaboration with William. That is not a reflection of light. That's actually the sunlight that William captured there. Beautiful thing on the left. I don't know how well you can see them, but just a little snapshot of my studio. Here's some more collaborative things from Mexico. That's a blue border on the bottom wall from a big project I'm working on right now. The red and white striped piece is actually Tepete. That was a collaborative project with a family of weavers from Teotitlan. So they took a watercolor painting of mine and translated it into this.
Wow.
Some sewn pieces, other experiments. There's a piece that I'm looking to collaborate with Nike. So if anybody knows any people at Nike, I would love to contact. Upstairs is our little showroom. We have a business selling home goods from Oaxaca, created in collaboration with artisans called Fiden Clark. Here's some more big banded paintings, right? There you guys are. And then here's my little office area. And kind of back to the corner. And back here.
That's great. Yeah,
A quick view, because I always, when I was a kid, I loved seeing artist studios, and that was like my dream. And I remember when I got my first studio at Art Space 111, I was in my 20s, and I thought I had arrived. I did not need anything else in life to be successful. I had a studio, and that was just the dream.
right.
I got Black Brothers for that, and Nancy Lamb. And most of these photographs were taken by the wonderful photographer Kevin Todora in Dallas. He documents a lot of artists' work around town.
So we have a couple of questions and we have a tiny little bit of time. And I just want to mention, Cynthia Boyd, I am so sorry if the captions were blurred. I don't know why they were, but we'll look into that for the next presentation. Hopefully the images weren't blurred. Jerry Javis asks, regarding what is above remains below, were the drips accidental, but you liked them and continued, or were they pre-planned?
That's that control thing. I mean, I knew I was going to make drips. How they were going to react and how they were going to drip was kind of up to the drip. So you could say, yes, I pre-planned them, but how they were going to run, how far they ran, not as much.
Okay. And Matt, when you sit before a blank canvas, do you begin with the intentional or the accidental? That's a good question.
Good question, Brian. My thing is, I don't like looking at a white canvas. I don't know about other artists, but my thing is to cover it up. So my first thing is to put something on the ground so I can respond. So that might be a wash of paint. It might be a different kind of paint application. It might be the little dots accumulated over one another. Just something to start that conversation between me and the painting.
Mm-hmm. Someone asks, what was the media used for Atlas?
Atlas, that was all acrylic paint.
Very good. And I think, was Monet an inspiration for Untitled 60/30?
You would have to say yes, but I would say yes subconsciously. Like I said before, I had been exposed to that show, Monet in the Mediterranean.
Mm-hmm.
And that somewhere sunk into my subconscious because I wasn't directly thinking about Monet when I made the painting, but you can't help but see Monet in that painting.
Right. Well, I think that that is about all of our time today. I want to let everyone know that, yes, this is recorded, and in a week or so, it will be posted on the Kimball's YouTube site, so you can watch it again and again and again if you want to revisit. Matt, this is just, it's been such a pleasure
Yeah.
working for a year, so
I'm
to
glad
speak.
we finally got it booked and done. This has been
Yeah,
fun.
and we were talking earlier just about the fact that one of the last social functions that my husband Steve and I attended before March 11th, 2020 was a wonderful dinner at your studio that you and Molly hosted for, you know, a mixed group of people. Just, I mean, it was tequila and great food and surrounded by all of this wonderful artwork. And I'm looking forward to the next time that we can do that.
Gosh, me too. I tell you, we miss those dinners and we miss hanging out with our friends and new people, and we can't wait to get back to that. And hey, it's been a lot of fun and a real honor here. Again, thank you for including me. It's been such a privilege to share a little bit about my practice in relationship to, you know, the museum that has the biggest place in my heart. So it's been a lot of fun. Thank you.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you everyone for joining today. I know we have another Artist Eye coming up. I'm so sorry, I can't recall when it is. I think it's, I want to say it's Nancy Edwards and Linda Ridgway, but if you go to our website, kimballart.org, you'll be able to see what the next program is. So again, thank you, Matt. We'll see you soon, I hope. And Molly too, I know she's there. So thanks everyone. Bye-bye.
Hope you all have a great weekend.
Great weekend.
Bye.